and I'd like to welcome you to this first Spring Talking in the Library series event. And we are featuring Tom Shea, who's having his tea over here. We'll have Adam Braver introduce Tom in a moment. I wanted to share with you a little bit of information about our upcoming events because there's quite a few this spring. On February 22nd, we will host a book discussion in honor of the 50th anniversary of the novel 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And the book discussion will be held at Rogers Free Library, and the discussion will be led by Cheryl Stein, who's one of their librarians. And it will be held at 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. The Burst keynote lecture will be March 1st in the Mary Teft White right here at 4:30 p.m. And the keynote speaker will be Professor Maria Elena Rueda from Smith College. She's a professor there, and she is a Marquez scholar. On March 7th, we'll feature the playwright, comic book artist, and children's book author Manjula Padmanabhan, known for her comic book character Suki. And on April 3rd, as part of a Vermont Writers Fellowship, we will host the author Rick Moody as our distinguished visiting writer. Rick is best known for his novel The Ice Storm, which they then made into a movie. And his latest novel is Hotels of North America, which is hilarious. I encourage you to read it. So we're meeting this afternoon in the Mary Teft White Center. This is called the Instant Theater. And Mary Teft, or Happy White as she was known, was a proud alumna of the university who earned her degree here late in her later years. It was her generous endowed gift to the Roger Williams Library that made the lecture series and this space possible. Her hope was that by introducing students to accomplished individuals who could share their professional and personal stories, that our students would be inspired and motivated in their choice of careers. We're also grateful to her son, John Hazen White Jr., for continuing his mother's legacy by supporting the transformation of this particular room into an instant theater, which features the latest technology and can quickly transform from an event space like this to a student collaborative space. You see all the digital displays around the world, around the room. You can actually share your laptops on these screens. So without further ado, Adam, our author in residence, is going to introduce Tom.
All right, thank you for coming out. Some students that I've had in classes know that when it comes to making and understanding art, that I am less interested in the puzzle piece of it or the reduction of it to the sum of its parts that become easily named and categorized. Instead, I'm interested in the experience we have through engaging with a work, the reaction, the effect it has over us, where it takes us. I don't trust art whose goal is to be analyzed, and I don't trust the person who sees the work as nothing more than an occasion to undo it, diffuse it, and turn it into a Sunday night stew of theory, terminology, assumption, and product, all the while undermining, consciously or unconsciously, the very reason we are drawn to art. Here's where I'm going. Tommy Shea, over the course of his career in journalism, has had three very distinct tracks. He's been an investigative reporter, gaining early renown for being on a spotlight team for the Springfield Republican, uncovering allegations of priest abuses well before the Boston Globe, in fact, was onto its well-known coverage and reporting. For many years, he covered the Boston Red Sox, traveling with them as a daily reporter. And Tommy also was a columnist, quite often focusing on subjects that celebrated the best of humanity in his region. What interests me is the intersection of all these moments. I suspect these are not random assignments or a collision of disparate opportunities. In fact, I picture a center, and in that center, like a masterwork of some kind, is a central experience, one in which all of these other parts have, in their own unique ways, been creating. And while the English novelist Jim Crace implored in a 2003 Paris Review interview, to ask a novelist to talk about writing is like asking somebody to cook about their dancing. And while I would never presume Tommy would reduce a 40-year career in writing to the academicized sum of its parts, I at least experience a larger human experience through the total collage of Tommy's writings. And that, perhaps, is the experience of facing this world through its ugliness, its beauty, its glory, and its heartbreak. Tommy Shea.
Thank you, Adam. I mean, probably can tell I'm Irish. I'm blushing already. And I'm not that good, honest. But that's very Irish, too. Thank you for the lovely welcome. Everybody here, and you have such a beautiful library and I love the fact that the Mary's nickname was Happy. Is there a reason why?
Not to my knowledge.
Only because that's something that, you know, if you walk through a cemetery and you see somebody, I don't think it's partly ironic. It's probably all true. Lovely. But again, thank you very much. And geez, after your introduction, sometimes I wonder why I write a speech. How many folks here are baseball fans? Oh, well, that doesn't hurt this speech at all. How would I say this? When I was a kid, probably before I knew the alphabet, I knew who Nap Lajoie was. How many people here know who Nap Lajoie? You know, he's more than 100 years ago, around 100 years ago, you know, he was probably the best baseball player in the land. And so that was kind of my education, as I knew who Nap Lajoie was, you know, before I made my first communion. But then as I got older, I realized, you know, I wasn't going to be a baseball player. And so then I wanted to be Raleigh Heeman, you know what I mean? Because he was the general manager when I was a kid at the Chicago White Sox. And he's from somewhere. Is he from Woonsocket too? No, he's somewhere, Central Falls maybe? He's somewhere in Rhode Island, and I figured, I grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, and that wasn't that far, so I thought, gee, I'd be a general manager like Raleigh. And in this year of, well, I guess it's still the baseball off season, Gabby Hart, you know, was the great Cubby. And before the Cubs had their great rise this year again, he hit the most famous home run in Cub history. It was, what was it called? The Homer in the Gloaming. And I could read you. I wrote a book on baseball, and that's like one of the more famous chapters of in Cub history, and a Rhode Island guy. And he's a year older than me. Now, are you from Rhode Island? Then Billy Allman was a year older than Ken and I, and he was the #1 pick in the baseball draft in 1974. And he was from Brown, and again, he was from around here. And when I started doing baseball, I don't know if any of you heard of him, but he was a lovely, lovely man. One of the nicest people I've ever met was Hank Soar. Do you remember, anybody remember Hank? He was a major league umpire, and he was the kind of guy when I knew him, he had retired, and when he shook my hand, his hand went up to here. Like, what nationality would Soar be? Would that be Portuguese? Is that yeah? And so, you know, God bless Rhode Island and its baseball heritage. I appreciate it anyways, and I'm from Massachusetts. The first time I ever knelt to pray all by myself was on the side of my childhood bed. And I mean, I had prayed at school, at Our Lady of Hope, where Sister Helen John had taught me how to read and to pray. God bless her. And while I knew all the words, I didn't know the music at the time. And by music, I mean the fervent sense of intention. And as we all know now, prayer can be a single word, help or please. Or it can sound like a train without brakes rumbling down a track, a mouthful of promises to keep. Or something written centuries ago that seems to fit the situation right now. I didn't know at the time that God sometimes said no, but there I knelt, folded hands, head bowed, a portrait of the Sacred Heart of Jesus looking down on me, and I prayed. Lord, I intoned, though intone would have been quite a verb for someone 7 going on 8. May my knees hurt instead of Mickey Mantle's. I was that kind of baseball fan from the start. It was the only language I was fluent in for so long, and so many people spoke it back to me, adults, the big kids. It was there for me when I couldn't speak up in class or talk to girls, but I could talk baseball. And even now, all these years later, when so many of us are yapping about man and God and law and music, we turn to baseball. Always baseball. God didn't answer that prayer when I was a little kid. My knees at 61 are fine. But the lack of response from heaven didn't deter my praying. It wasn't long after that I decided I was going to become holy enough to become the first American pope. I could always tell when there's Catholics in the audience, and I use a line like that, how I don't know, fantastical it was to think that way, but that's how I did. And I had a name picked out and everything, Pope Patrick I. I thought that would make my parents happy. And what else could I name myself? I grew up in a place called Hungry Hill. Think about that. It was all like Irish immigrants, Hungry Hill. And but baseball was always there in the background like a good friend. And I thought if I wasn't holy enough, I would replace Mickey Mantle of the center field as the center fielder of the Yankees. Any Yankee fans here? Not one. How many here are Red Sox fans? Well, I have a feeling you're going to go... anybody else besides a Red Sox fan?
Dodgers.
God bless the Dodgers. They let Jackie Robinson play. You know what I mean? That's. I think if I was a little bit older, I have some older friends that their fathers used to take them to Brooklyn. Why are you a Dodger fan?
I'm from Brooklyn.
Ah.
You had to be.
Oh, of course. Now, well, you'll hear in this speech or what I have here. I wrote multiple ones actually, but you'll hear about a native son anyways in that Brooklyn, that the Dodgers. What part of Brooklyn were you from?
Bay Ridge.
Oh yeah. But for Red Sox fans, I really think you're going to go like 159-3 this year, and then get beat by Terry Francona in the playoffs. But the Red Sox are awfully good. Are you as optimistic as me about the Red Sox? Yeah? Are you a Red Sox fan? Oh.
Red Sox and Phillies.
Oh, that's, I find that, again, if you walked around, this young girl, when you came in, I first thought you had a Phillies hat on.
I mean, I have one. I'm from Philly, so yeah.
Isn't that weird? Like when you walked in, I was gonna go over and say, why are you wearing a Philly?
No, just our school's hat.
That's a, it looks like a Philly hat. Are you a Philly fan?
Yeah.
Oh, you're in for a rough year. Yeah. Oh well, it builds character, they say. You know what I mean? But yeah, I wanted to be either the Pope or Mickey Mantle as a kid, you know? And I was, how would you say it? I was bashful then. You know what I mean? It was, and but at 13, I realized I wasn't going to make the major leagues, and I was disqualified from being the Pope because I liked Patty Donahue, and even though Patty Donahue didn't like me back, you know, I felt I was disqualified in 1968 from being the Pope, and but then, you know, like I delivered newspapers and I sold newspapers in front of a church, and I love sports. You know, it was just kind of all I thought about. And I realized people have to cover the games that I was so interested in that I decided to become, you know, a sports writer. And it was Sister Patricia Feely who allowed me to take her journalism class, and Jim Fox, who invited me to the local newspaper, and then it was a guy named Paul Donahue who let me stay. And this book I wrote, I dedicated to them because they changed my life. And I hope all of you have those kind of influential people that, you know, say yes when it would be just as easy to say no. And but the book could have been dedicated to people like Tom and Patty Carney or Mackie Garvey, men who nurtured the love of baseball in me, and Pete Hamill, the great writer from Brooklyn, once wrote that that's how so many immigrants became Americans, through baseball. And my late father, who was as Irish could get, he was from there, but you wouldn't have understood a word he said because he had this guttural Kerry accent that most of my friends, they would just nod every time he talked because they just couldn't figure out what he was saying. But, and he wasn't Irish in that God made Irish #1 or, you know, that kind of stuff. It was just, he was Irish. And very few things about America dented him, though he did like Mr. Ed, the Talking Horse, and The Sopranos. But he was always complaining about Carl Yastrzemski and telling me to eat my potatoes because Mickey Mantle did. I was a sports writer in one chapter of my life, even covering the Red Sox from 1980 to 1985. Any of you students, you wouldn't have been born then, right? No? Like, what would be the, what year were you born? 95. I was gray by then, you know. 95. Is that the realm of a... That's when the Yankees started to get good again, though. That's how I remember phone numbers, like my wife's cell phone. I can remember 5. I'm not that bad. But then I go 63, Yankees lost in the World Series. 39, maybe the greatest baseball team ever. And then 58, the Yankees came back and beat the Milwaukee Braves. That's really, I don't think of numbers any other way than that. But when I covered the Red Sox, it was a great job for a Yankee fan because if the Red Sox won, they were in a good mood to talk to the press. And if they lost, well, that always makes me happy. And it didn't occur to me until after I left the beat that I spent most of my early adult life interviewing men in a state of undress. Because that's what, after the game, you go in and you interview someone who just got out of the shower. And as a 61-year-old guy now, I think, what could anybody possibly say that would be interesting? You know, like, while you're drying. You know, but that was my job. I got paid for it, which was okay by me. And, but my first job was covering Little League games and high school sports, and I wrote for the afternoon newspaper. And that meant any game I covered was already reported on television, then written about, that I covered was already reported on television and then written about in the morning paper. And so this is, you know, typewriters and things like that we had. And so I had to come up with a different story, because why would you, if let's say you attended the game, you saw highlights on TV and actually read the morning paper, why would you want to read the afternoon paper? So you had to be different. And in the sports vernacular of the time, it was the unsung hero, or Shiro, the pulling guard who paved the way for the star running back, the person who fed the leading scorer on the basketball team those passes. And, like I was always looking for something different that would tell the story, but tell it in hopefully a unique way or a different way or a more thoughtful way than just, what the score was. And it wasn't hard for me. I grew up in a neighborhood that nourished that kind of outlook. I was hardly a Phi Beta Kappa kid. In that era, I was lucky that they gave 200 points for just signing your name to the SATs. I bet that wasn't your problem, Ken, or yours, Adam. But no, it's but I figured out pretty early that mothers in the neighborhood did most of the work, and that the nuns at school did just about all the heavy lifting and rarely got credit for it. And it wasn't a political position. All I had to do was open my eyes and pay attention to the obvious. And it was all around me. And by the time I was like in my late teens, I read something that I already knew, but it kind of cemented in my head is often, the best stories are in the losing locker room. Or the best stories are when it doesn't go well, it doesn't go right, and that you have to continue on, thrive on, and I was also reading Jimmy Breslin by then, and has anybody here heard of Jimmy Breslin? Oh, God bless. Read Jimmy Breslin. Jimmy Breslin he's still writing. He's going to come out with a new novel, and he'll be 86. So, people, when will you be 86 if you're born in 95? In 2081, right? Is my math right? Can I get 3 credits for that? No. But he's still at it. And that's the thing, too, about writing is how many here want to write? Wow, that's really good. Like, who do you read that you want to write? Because to write, you have to read, right? Who are your favorite writers? Don't worry, I'm a stranger. You can answer that question.
Sorry. I've been reading a lot of Gillian Flynn recently, and Paula Hawkins, like The Girl on the Train, as well. But I love to write poetry too, and so I read a lot of Walt Whitman and E. Cummings and those types of.
And were you a reader in high school?
I was.
When did you start writing poetry?
Well, I used to write like little kid rhymes when I was.
Doesn't make any difference.
But
When you're famous, they'll put it in a museum or in a library. I go to visit Pete Hamill's papers at Boston University. That you think, oh, well, do you save your work?
I do, yes.
Yeah. And this is off the track. Did you like the movie?
I haven't seen the movie yet,
Yeah.
actually.
You see the movie? No. I'll save my opinion, but no. But I'd be curious what you thought of the movie. And around that time, like in my late teens, I read David Halberstam, and David Halberstam, for people my generation, was like the leading. One of the leading nonfiction writers in America. He wrote about the Vietnam War, he wrote about civil rights, and he's back in the news because of Steve Bannon, is that someone saw Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is, an aide to President Trump, and this reporter, sports writer for the New York Times, was walking through the Atlanta airport, and he saw him reading the best and the brightest. And the reporter being nosy, and that's one thing that's always helpful when you're a reporter. My mother thinks I'm terribly nosy because I'm always asking people how old they are. And my mother says, does anybody ever not tell you? And I said, no, everybody kind of, you know what I mean? And I'm not doing that in a, I'm not trying to be that intrusive. I just am curious. And that's one of the facts. How old is that person? What does that person do? Yeah. Well, anyways, the book, The Best and the Brightest, was about all the errors that the United States made during the Vietnam War. But what David had, the point of this is he covered all the great issues of the day, but in the end, what he would do is write a major book, let's say on Vietnam, and then follow it up with a sports book because he was interested. So let's say, for all you baseball fans here, you can read The Summer of 1949 by him. It's about the Red Sox and the Yankees in 1949. Then he wrote a wonderful book about basketball and the Bill Walton era. And the thing is that and then I'll go on to David Moranis, who works for the Washington Post, who wrote the first big book on Bill Clinton, President Clinton. When that book was a success, they said to his book publishing company, said, what do you want to write about next? And he says, I want to write about Vince Lombardi, who was that's who the Super Bowl trophy is named after. He's probably a nicer guy than Bill Belichick, Vince Lombardi. I think he may. Are you all Patriot fans too? No? What do you root for?
Denver Broncos.
Why?
Because he doesn't like that.
Oh, no, because who else are not Patriot fans? Are you an Eagle? Are you an Eagle fan? Do you live in Philadelphia?
No, I live in South Jersey. I'm about a half hour to live.
Yeah. That's God bless you though. That's what do you think of Patriot fans?
Oh, they're everywhere here. So like, what? Watching the Super Bowl, you just like stay quiet, not say your opinion, just like let them have it. Again, growing up, I didn't really know any Patriot fans. I'm not really a football fan anymore. But like it's like a religion. Now, do you think the Red Sox or the Patriots are more popular? I haven't seen it here in baseball season yet, so I've
Oh.
only seen like everyone like leading up to the Super Bowl and afterwards, everyone like Patriots sweatshirts and pajamas and like, everywhere. So like, who knows? I'll see. This is my first time being here in the spring, so we'll see.
Wait till you see Red Sox. They are something else. Though my only claim to Patriot fame is Tom Brady had a child with Bridget Moynihan, and Bridget Moynihan lives the next town over. And her real name isn't Bridget, it's Catherine. That's all I have. I don't know anything else about that. I know the name of Belichick and again, I come back to Pete Hamill. Pete Hamill, if you haven't been aware of him, just a totally influential writer, like in my life. Oldest of 7 kids, immigrant parents, dropped out of high school. I didn't do that. But he would always acknowledge a guy named Jimmy Cannon, now a long-forgotten sports writer. And Jimmy Cannon once wrote the phrase, Joe Louis who was the heavyweight champion of the world, is a credit to his race, the human race. And this is the kind of thing is whatever, let's say I'm talking about sports today, but whatever genre you're writing in, is that it allows for that kind of phrase, paragraph, chapter that can kind of live forever, even if they forget your name. And the Joyce Carol Oates and Elmore Leonard, and again, I may be over talking about too many older people, said W.C. Hines, did you ever hear W.C. Hines? Wrote a novel, The Professional, to change their lives. And Hemingway loved the book. And Hines was a sports writer. In games, I always thought, though I always preferred my team to win, were more than hits, runs, and errors. And every story, in the end, is a people's story. I was 30 when I left sports, but I had a lot more questions to ask. And after a while, then I talked to people who were mostly clothed. You know what I mean? They were fully dressed. They weren't getting the head and shoulders out of their hair. I was already practiced in the fine art, as the writer Gay Talese says, of hanging out. So there were 6 years of writing about anything I wanted to write, for the most part. And if you won the lottery, I might be on your doorstep. Or if you were indicted, I could be ringing your doorbell. And that's really the kind of pass or you have as somebody, as a reporter, is in the sense you get to peek behind the curtain of Oz. Many ways. You have like this kind of license, and with that license comes responsibility to ask the people's question, that it isn't about you, that you're writing for an audience, be it, you never knew who your audience was. I was interested in religion, elderly issues, politics, on the second string kind of level. And I was always looking for that obvious, which meant, I'll use myself as a Catholic. I was used to these gigantic churches, just these beautiful pieces of art. But I would drive by storefront churches that used to be Jimmy's Market. And what was that like? And I was like the explorer, kind of, into that world. And because, let's say, Catholic priesthood, and let's say my experience as a kid growing up, gave really lousy sermons. Any Catholics here to disagree with me as a kid? I just didn't find them. So I'd say, how does one put together like a great sermon? And that was the kind of thing. And I don't know how your classes are organized, but I always figured I'd rather do the stories I'm interested in than something that's assigned to me, if that's an option. So that's why I always, like coming here, I saw a place called Purgatory. What is that? No, really?
That happened probably many, many years ago. And it is a giant chasm. People go hiking.
And why was it named Purgatory? Only because I'm of the, like Purgatory was and may still be a destination, and you just don't see the word. And I was doing, like the legal speed limit and all that. And I go, Purgatory, but I didn't write it down, and I'm much better when I write things down. But those are the kind of things that I'm always looking out. And let's say even coming up here is, I obviously it's a beautiful building, and I didn't, but there's something about the lighting that interests me. It's very inviting. And I don't know, does an engineer, does an electrician? That's another great thing about like doing stories or writing, is that you get to ask a lot of dumb questions that other people may have. But there is something inviting about this space. I never saw it before, and I've, been in plenty of places where, there's, fine carpeting, but it doesn't feel inviting. When I was given the column, and a column is in a newspaper or even someone who does a blog is obviously their opinion. It's not like a news story. But when I was given it, I was 40 years old, and I was uncomfortable. Let's say I'll joke around in my opinion about baseball, and let's say Adam knows I know a lot about Bob Dylan, so I could have opinions about that. But like on most things, let's say like the tax rate in this town, what would I know about that? What do I know about any of these plumbing and I didn't want to be like kind of a bar room philosopher or preacher, and so I ended up doing a column about regular people, like working people, people who normally don't get their name in the newspaper, and they're really not that hard to find. It's our favorite aunt who spoiled us, the cop who gave us a break, the teacher who told you you have potential, and the father's friend who always played catch with you. It's kind of like It's a Wonderful Life. Take that person out of the equation and see how our world would be changed and altered. I still find it fun writing about people who don't think anyone is watching, that they do their good work simply because it's, like the right thing to do. And they aren't looking for attention or applause, and they're kind of an unseen hand at work, invisible in many ways, right there in broad daylight. And I think, I don't know, if you give yourself a second or two to think about it, we have all those kind of people who the only time they would see their name in the paper, or the only time their name would be in the paper, and they wouldn't even get a chance to see it, is in their obituary. And, or, I don't know. And that's how I felt that, let's say, when I was given that writing opportunity, that how I would make use of it. And, like I've been to schools where teachers bring imagination and intellect to life, and hospitals where nurses bring comfort and joy. And, life will always be hard. Politics will always be mean. Money will be scarce. Bluster will be plentiful. Yet, somehow, the good will be done. And the people I tended to write about kind of stood in like a opposition to a spiritual isolationism that, it kind of makes icicles of our insides and a hard little lump of coal in our hearts, and they don't even know it. There were only two things that were hard about the job, and one was to make it all fit into 650 words. How long are your assignments? Is 650 words a lot or not?
We have to tweet a lot.
I'm sorry?
We have to tweet a lot.
Yeah, you don't get many words in those, though. Huh? What is it, 140 for a tweet? 140? Boy, that's right. Characters, not words. So do you think 650 words is a lot?
It depends. I don't think it's, I know what you're writing, I guess.
See, I'm only clearing my throat usually at 650. You know what I mean? That you do the, let's say, the reporting, and it's like I always felt like I could salvage some of the stuff from a cutting room floor, and try to piece it together in another kind of story. And but the 650 words were tough because if I went over, they'd cut it, and sometimes once, and this wasn't during writing columns, but I was describing a triple play, and I must have went on too long, and they cut it after 2 were out. Yeah, that ever happened to you? And my name's on it, so I mean, there's nobody in like a composing room that's going to be blamed. The other hard part is, let's say, having these people who are usually so humble, shy, to talk to me. You know, it was always an honor. It still is an honor in the sense of getting them to tell their story. And if they wouldn't tell it, then you'd have to find, let's say, one of their children or a neighbor or someone that would shine a light on it. And I had a part that used to wake me up at 4 a.m. is that you'd wake up and go, oh, I could have told it better, you know? How many of you like rewriting? Oh, good. That's very good. I always like rewriting. But, and again, it was the kind of honor of sitting at the head of someone's kitchen table listening to their fear and prayers the night they escaped Vietnam on a rickety boat, or listening to someone describe the danger of battle, the loneliness of imprisonment, the pangs of hunger, the agony of torture. And those are the stories that are out there. And again, for the folks around my age, remember Charles Kuralt? He once showed up at a journalism banquet, and a reporter there said, all I have to do, are there phone books anymore? Yeah, no, not much, but this journalist said he could run his finger down a phone book and stop at somebody's name and get a good story. And among the stories he had was someone who finished second in the National Spelling Bee, who was on a truck into one of the German death camps, you know? And the thing is, there is a story, almost. Well, I would say, obviously, everybody has a story. And then, you know, like, one of my things I would do every year is try to do a column on the first person in a family ever to go to college, because that was just such a big deal in my neighborhood. And Springfield is still like a city of immigrants, and that kind of excitement, you know, to get that kind of envelope. And people would ask if I miss covering the Red Sox or if I'd like to cover City Hall or be at a murder trial or something. And I guess the question always implied, did I miss covering the great issues of the day? But I didn't think I ever was missing the great issues of the day, because what was it in Dickens? Mankind was my business, you know, Spectre cried. And the lesson learned too late. The common welfare was my business. And that's the most important thing I've learned in the newspaper business, is that our business is one another. And I thought I overwent my stay, but I have 10 minutes. I have, certainly, as long as they're not math questions. No, I'm kidding. I don't want to discourage math or science in any way, shape, or form.
I have a question, Tom. You talked about with the column you like to hear people who did great works, who weren't doing their works to be recognized, and that you were recognizing. Yet I presume in the locker room you were with people that were dying to be recognized.
Yeah.
At all times, and I'm wondering if there's an intersection in that for you, if those are parallel worlds.
Well, it was kind of interesting because, and I stopped doing baseball in '85, so it's a whole different generation now. And it's funny, they almost a lot. Red Sox were a tougher crowd in that time, you know, as players. Though they had, for those of you, if you remember, like Bruce Hurst and Rich Gedman and Marty Barrett and those guys, really lovely men. But there were some rough characters, and a lot of them really didn't almost get the idea of why the press was there, and they, you know, it basically kind of give the same answer time after time. And for me, it sort of got boring. That's why, you know, one of the good things, how many people want to get into the media here? How many students here? Media is a really, you know, let's say, and it will come back around where wages will be, you know, where you can buy a house and buy the car that you want. And obviously in certain places it's like that now, but there is a transition going on, and they, you know, like, it was hard to get them, to draw them out unless they got to know you very, very well, and then they'd kind of draw you out. But a lot of them, it was odd to me when I first went into a professional dressing room, is they weren't really as big a baseball fan as, let's say, I am or you are. You know, they were just particularly gifted at this particular talent that made people stand up and cheer and have people sign their autographs. They were like more impressed with like someone who could hold like 12 baseballs in their hand and stuff. You know, it was kind of interesting to me. But once they would get to talk, they could be very deep. As let's say somebody like Bill Buckner, who, you know, was like really kind of demonized, you know, by Red Sox Nation for so long. This was a guy that after games would stand in these 2 ice buckets every game. And I, you know, even at the time he was making a great deal of money because his ankles were just, it was hard to believe he could stand. And, you know, he would talk about like the pain that he was actually in. And then they could be very good, but like on a day-to-day, oftentimes, let's say baseball is such a long season that I'm sure they get tired of the questions, and it's our job to ask questions. You know, like it's, what would you ask Tom Brady, let's say, if you walked in here right now? President, I would ask about his workout routine, because I'm not, let's say, again, a football fan, but I also realize that like the age of 39, what he does is kind of remarkable, you know, and football being the such, you know, violent and so competitive and so cerebral as a, or even how he keeps his desire. Because let's say if you've won 4 rings, what makes you want to, well, I know in his case, you know, this year was, you know, because of his suspension, but, you know, those are, and there is, let's say, like a pay gap. I don't know if you find this, where sometimes it's, they don't live like, everything is, you know, like a private jet, and maybe folks here at Roger Williams have access to private jet, you know, but they don't, it is a kind of, you know, they're not living like, kind of like in our kind of space. So, and so people who don't normally, let's say, all right, I'll use a school crossing guard. I was always amazed in our neck of the woods that school crossing guards would go into traffic with a cardboard sign that said stop. And these are people that are not obeying traffic laws, meaning usually, you know, flying down the street. And what is that like? I mean, you know, like it's like a Seinfeld episode where they go with the cabbie, oh, he's an expert. He just missed that car by, you know, 1/8 of an inch. And yeah, sometimes people, but I was never out to, let's say, quote unquote, expose them. Like I knew the difference between talking to, you know, a school crossing guard and the district attorney. You know, there are kind of different rules. And, you know, I wasn't, in these kind of stories, let's say, that I would write about, I wasn't, you know, there's context of why you whatever degree of power I had, I wanted to use it wisely and effectively and in, really service to the story. You know what I mean? This wasn't, I didn't want to see, someone who was making school lunches. I didn't need to see their tax returns, or I didn't have to, there was something I was more interested in. Did they need ever to see macaroni and cheese again, let's say? You know what I mean? Or like, what's their, well, I went 12 years of Catholic school. You couldn't give me meatloaf. You know what I mean? It's like kryptonite to me or whatever. It just was twice a week for 12 years, and I can't do it anymore. And so that's like a story unto itself, where. Any other questions? Yes?
A minute ago, you seemed to be a bit optimistic about the future of journalism for budding journalists.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about why you?
Well, one is, thank you, that's a great question, is one, and talking to Adam and Allison at lunch, one is, I guess supply and demand is why has Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post? Why has John Henry bought the Boston Globe? These aren't, they're hardcore business people, and they must see a future in it. And that makes me optimistic. And people talk about, that there are all sorts of, like rumors who's buying what, because at the end of the day, we all want news, and then eventually we will pay for the news like used to pay for the news. It is a commodity that, let's say, if the New York Times or the Washington Post has someone in Syria, never mind, let's say, whatever salary that person has, you have to think of like their health insurance. And people are interested. And I think, and we, again, Adam and I talked about it today, is around the time you guys were born, you all were born, that there was a pay system that, let's say, if you subscribe to a magazine, you'd get 30 hours of free time on the internet. And eventually, something like that will come back because everything costs something. And also, as you can see, like in this election cycle, driving here today, so I didn't do any research on this, but driving here today, I was listening to the NPR station, and they were interviewing the editor of the Boston Globe, and he said it was either 75 or 77,000 new subscribers to the Globe digitally, digital subscription. And he goes, it has been a boon. And the thing is, it's like anything, is if we go to a restaurant that you like, you pay, we pay, well, you're a smarter generation, you don't pay for, let's say, HB, you know what I mean? But eventually, bills come due. And let's say, no one's not interested in the news. Is there anybody here not interested that they, and there will be, if I was smart enough, I'd be working on it right now as far as when it'll turn. But let's say in 97, 98 is when it turned, when publishers and started giving it away for free. And thus it devalued, which was something very valuable. I mean, eventually, let's say I can get a subscription to Esquire magazine now for like $5.99 for 12 issues, but they know in their archive, it's like $80 a year because they understand. And let's say, I don't know how many, if the New Yorker is something that students read, but David Remnick, who's the editor of the New Yorker, says that his company, they do believe that people will pay for quality. It's like you pay for quality in your automobile or your winter boots, and you will pay for quality.
Thank you.
Oh, are you a journalist?
My son is a photojournalist.
Where?
Brooklyn paper, but Village Voice, but it's, $25 a shot, so he's not paying his rent.
The Philly boys.
But again, it's, they call you, they say, go there, take pictures.
Oh, no, I understand, but eventually,
Not a good model for him.
not right. How old is he?
He's 30.
No, but I know. See, they're caught in the.
He graduated just at the wrong time, yes.
You're 100% right. You're 100. Hopefully, you know that because the New York Times had the same kind of bump in circulation, and then let's say something like, for younger generation, Village Voice had such a profound impact on our culture.
It's open. Thank you.
Oh no, God bless him.
Question for you. We have time?
Do you get credit for coming here?
Speaking of Steve Bannon, when you hear something from a senior political figure who says the media is the opposition party, as a journalist, what is that? What do you hear?
Well, in some ways, it always has been. You know, that politicians and powerful people have always tried to control, before they could say the message, they tried to control the, what the story was going to be. And, Steve Bannon, if you want to read about Steve Bannon, go to the Washington Post. They did a story a couple of days ago on him. Hey, he was in the Navy longer than I thought he was. I thought and they're, more aggressive, but, I'm old enough to remember, the aggressiveness of the Nixon White House. And the journalists, if you're not trying to tell us close to the truth, and again, the truth can come from 3 or 4 different angles. And what I found in my career is, journalists really, really do try to put it in context, to put it in, to quote it as accurately. Nobody's perfect. And that's why, historians will go back. The thing about journalism, they say, what is this, the first line of history? Or it's and sometimes it changes. I once taught a class, and the day of 9/11, the Associated Press had 11 different leads in the course of like an hour because the information kept changing, and so there is always that corrective thing, and most newspapers still have a corrections column, like we messed up. And so, they're trying to intimidate and to get their message. And, there's probably other ways to do it. Sometimes flattery will get you everywhere. Or sometimes, it's always, I found that throughout my career. Let's say and Adam mentioned it, I did cover the first wave of pedophile priests, and I had covered religion, and I had sources. They were all really lovely people. One of them was the mother of the first girl I liked. She was like a secretary or personal assistant to the bishop, right? And so I thought, well, she'd call me back once, like this kind of, no. And my first thought on that when that story started to break is, oh, Bishop McGuire will do the right thing. And then, within a few hours, that wasn't what was transpiring. And that night, as, the paper was being put to bed, I was getting calls from, the chancery, from a priest giving me dirt on the father of the 2 boys who were being abused. And, I got to admit, I had not ever run into that, like kind of negative, like you go, well, this guy has 2 boys who've been abused, and there's somebody in the bishop's residence. It wasn't the, pulled out some file, and it like it was kind of mind-blowing. because, you know, I was a journalist, but I thought, well, geez, you know, end of the day, they would try to do right. And that's the nature of the pushback. And that's why, you know, like, yeah, you know, trust the press. And I go, well, what press are you reading? And don't get me wrong, you know, let's say like the New York Times reporting, you know, got us into the Iraq War. You know, I'm fully aware of, let's say, problems, but at the same time, there is trying to give some light or some context to it. And this is a story, and I'd like to do is how many people here saw Spotlight, the movie? Wow, that's very good. The real heroine of that movie was a judge from Springfield named Constance Sweeney. And went 12 years, you know, and she's the one, despite efforts by reporters, it was a judge who released the paper. You know what I mean? And to me, she's like somebody that should be on, well, I don't know, 60 Minutes. Like, what was the thought? You know, I don't know enough about the law. I would ask very basic questions. Like I tell everybody, we've heard every day of our lives the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I'm 61 and I don't know who Dow is or Jones is. And if I was put on the political or on the economic beat, I'd raise my hand and go, all right, obviously now I can go to the Google machine and look it up, but I'd go, who is Dow and who is Jones and why did they get to be named? You know, but let's say with Judge Sweeney is, you know, I understand the letter of the law, but like, what was her weekend like before she had to make that judgment? Or was it easy? Sometimes it's easy. You know, like the thing about vision or how stories go is once I was doing a story about someone who, you know, there was a guy got shot, died, and his mother was going to raise his child. And the story wasn't, oh, this heroic mother, you know, going to raise her son's child. It was, she hated the daughter-in-law. You know what I mean? It wasn't, you know, like that. It was more, and that's how life is. It can get messy. It doesn't follow like and that's why context or transitions in stories that you tell, like, because you don't want someone to go around and goes, that's not the real story. You want the real story to be as close as the real story. And I don't know. But again, like Constance Sweeney, Judge Sweeney, I think she's, and you know, she gets like 35 seconds in the movie. They have a faraway shot of her. They do mention her name, but it's like, ooh. So if anyone has a long assignment and needs to, Constance Sweeney, I don't know if she'd talk to you, but I hope she would.
Tom, thank you. And I also want to mention you have your
Yes, let's just say the baseball book, it's called Dingers, and it had nothing, a mutual friend knows the co-author. His name's Joshua Schifrin, and I'd never met Josh. Excuse me, and he wrote 25 of these. He came up with the idea. Dingers is another word for home runs. And every time I speak in Western Mass, Joshua's father delivered babies. He was a doctor. He was an OBGYN. And the record was, I'd say, how many people here had their babies delivered by Dr. Schifrin? And the record was 9. And then some woman told me that she had a crush on him. And then I found out 2 of my nieces were delivered by Dr. Schifrin. So it's kind of a small world. And the book is 101 most memorable home runs. And the thing is, for baseball fans anyways, we'd probably agree on 75 or 80 of them, you know, that would be right away. And then we could argue the rest of the winter about what the next 21. And so that's kind of like what baseball is, you know, that that kind of discussion that nobody's right and nobody's wrong. But we keep talking about it, so. And do say a prayer for my Yankees this year, though. You know what I mean? Come on. Now, what class are you all from? Are you all from different ones? Wow. Are you going to come to see Rick Moody, too?